In one single night, the New York Yankees erased 3 years of patience, 3 years of promises, and 3 years of standing by a former first-round pick who was supposed to be the face of their infield for the next decade. No press conference. No dramatic sit-down interview. Just a quiet transaction wire update after a brutal loss to the Cardinals, and suddenly the player the Yankees drafted, developed, defended, and handed the shortstop job to on opening day was on a bus to AAA. And he wasn't the only one. This is the story of the night the Yankees blew up their own roster, and why fans across New York are still trying to process exactly what just happened. Before we dive into it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this Yankees story has more layers than almost anything that's happened in the Bronx all season, and by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly why this shakeup could define New York's entire second half. Let's set the stage, because to understand how stunning this moment actually was, you have to understand what Anthony Volpe has meant to this organization. The Yankees took Volpe in the first round of the 2019 draft, a New Jersey kid who grew up dreaming about wearing the pinstripes, and they fast-tracked him through the system with a clear intention of making him the shortstop of the future. He debuted in 2023, was named the opening day starter that same year, and beat out another highly regarded prospect, Oswald Peraza, for the job. For a while, it looked like exactly the story the Yankees wanted to tell. A homegrown player, drafted and developed in-house, holding down one of the most important positions on the field in the middle of a championship window. But the follow-up seasons told a different story. Across parts of 4 major league seasons, Volpe posted a career batting average that hovered around the .220s, and even as his defensive reputation carried him for a while, that side of his game started slipping too. This year, his batting line sat at just .240 with a .325 on-base percentage and a .322 slugging percentage, numbers that, for a player at the bottom of the American League's toughest lineup, simply weren't good enough anymore. And here's the thing about the Yankees organization specifically. This wasn't a team that gave up on Volpe quickly. Manager Aaron Boone defended him publicly, over and over, across multiple seasons, even as the criticism from the fan base grew louder and louder. General Manager Brian Cashman stood by him too. This wasn't an organization looking for an excuse to cut bait. If anything, the opposite was true. The Yankees had been almost stubbornly loyal to Volpe, betting again and again that the tools that made him a first-round pick would eventually show up consistently at the highest level. So when the decision finally came, it didn't feel like a snap judgment. It felt like the conclusion of a 3-year conversation that the entire organization had been having with itself, finally reaching its breaking point. That breaking point arrived after a lopsided 13-7 loss to the St. Louis Cardinals. Following that game, the Yankees made the call. Volpe was optioned to AAA's Scranton/Wilkes-Barre. And in the same set of roster moves, outfielder Jason Dominguez, a former top prospect himself, once nicknamed the Martian for his ceiling, was sent down as well, along with reliever Angel Chivilli, who'd struggled badly over his previous outings. 3 players who, at various points, had been talked about as centerpieces of New York's next great core, all optioned out within the same set of transactions. Now, this wasn't just about subtraction. It was about who was coming in to take their place. With Volpe out, the Yankees called up George Lombard Jr., their first-round pick from the 2023 draft and, by nearly every account, the best prospect left in their farm system. Lombard had been climbing the ladder all year, jumping from AA Somerset to AAA Scranton back in late April, and he made his big league debut immediately after the Volpe move, playing shortstop, the exact position the organization had spent 3 years trying to make Volpe's own. In his very first start, Lombard went 1 for 2 with a solo home run. It was almost 2 on the nose. The kid the Yankees are hoping becomes their next great homegrown star, delivering instantly. in the same lineup spot the player he was replacing had occupied for years. And the timing of all this wasn't random either. This shakeup landed right in the middle of the trade deadline chaos. Just one day before the Volpe and Dominguez demotions, the Yankees had made two notable trade deadline additions, acquiring infielder Luis Garcia Jr. from the Washington Nationals and outfielder Heliot Ramos, a 2024 All-Star, from the San Francisco Giants. Both of those moves needed roster spots. Dominguez's demotion, in particular, tracked directly with the Ramos acquisition, since Ramos plays a similar outfield role, and the Yankees needed to clear room for him on the active roster. So part of this shakeup was simple roster math. You can't add pieces at the deadline without subtracting somewhere else. But the fact that the subtraction landed on Volpe, a former opening day shortstop with 3 years of major league service time, is what made the entire move feel so much bigger than a standard corresponding transaction. Manager Aaron Boone didn't try to spin the moment as anything other than difficult. He described it as one of those tough conversations you have to have as a manager, and he used his own career as an example, a player who had to go back to the minors himself and earn his way back to the majors before eventually becoming a big leaguer again. Boone specifically said of both Volpe and Dominguez, quote, "Two people that we love and think highly of and think still have very bright big league careers ahead of them." That's the kind of language that tells you this wasn't punitive. It wasn't the organization giving up. It was the organization deciding that the version of these two players, who could help win right now, needed more development time before they got another shot in the Bronx. But here's where the story gets even more interesting, because almost immediately after the demotion, the Yankees made a decision about Volpe's future that a huge chunk of the fan base had been begging for what felt like years. Hours after he was optioned, Boone confirmed that Volpe would not just keep playing shortstop in the minors, he would also get real reps at second base. Think about how significant that actually is. Volpe hadn't played anywhere besides shortstop as a professional since 2021, when he logged just 5 total games at second and third base, all the way back in Single-A. For 4 full years, everything about his development had been built around remaining a shortstop. And now, with Lombard clearly established as the shortstop of the present and the future, the Yankees were finally willing to explore whether Volpe's bat and speed could play somewhere else on the diamond. Fans reacted to that update almost as strongly as they reacted to the demotion itself. Comments flooded in calling it the move fans had wanted for over a year. Some pointed out that with how thin second base talent is across the league right now, a version of Volpe who hits enough and handles the position defensively could genuinely have real value there, even if the shortstop dream never fully materializes. And Volpe, to his credit, didn't sulk about any of it. In his very first game back in the minors, he hit a home run, something he'd done just once in over 170 at-bats during his struggles at the big league level that year. It was a small moment, but a telling one. The kind of moment that fuels the argument from people close to the situation, like former Yankee Cameron Maybin, who publicly pushed back on how harshly some fans have talked about Volpe, pointing out that this is a kid who grew up dreaming of wearing the pinstripes and, by every account, gave the organization everything he had. Maybin's message was simple. Respect what Volpe did give this team, and get excited about what Lombard represents next, instead of turning the whole saga into a referendum on one player's worth as a person. Not everyone in the media world agreed with how the fan base handled the moment, either. MLB analyst Keith McPherson publicly told off parts of the Yankees fan base for what he called an unhealthy obsession with tearing Volpe down, specifically pushing back on fans who were comparing him unfavorably to established stars at the position. It's a reminder that even when an organization makes a roster move this dramatic, the emotional reaction from the fan base, and the debate about whether that reaction is fair, becomes its own separate storyline entirely. Now, zoom out for a second. because none of this happened in a vacuum. The Yankees made this move while dealing with one of the most brutal injury stretches of their season. Aaron Judge, the reigning face of the franchise, has been out since early June with a stress fracture in his right rib, an injury serious enough that he was eventually transferred to the 60-day injured list. Cody Bellinger, who the Yankees built a huge part of their outfield around, went down in late July with a grade 2 hamstring strain that was expected to keep him out for 4 to 6 weeks. Giancarlo Stanton has been out since April with a calf injury. 3 significant middle-of-the-order pieces, all sidelined at the same time, all while New York tried to hold off Tampa Bay in a tight American League East race. That's the environment this roster shakeup happened inside of. It wasn't a last-place team blowing things up for the future. It was a team fighting for its playoff life, missing multiple star players, deciding that even with all that pressure, it still needed to get more disciplined and more competitive with the roster spots it did control. Think about the emotional whiplash of that combination for a second. On one hand, the Yankees are watching their captain do rehab drills on a backfield, running sprints in the outfield as fans wait anxiously for any sign he might return before October. On the other hand, they're making the hard, unsentimental call to send down a former opening day shortstop and a former top 10 prospect on the same night, because the team in front of them right now needs better production today, not eventually. That's not an organization that's comfortable. That's an organization under real pressure, trying to solve multiple problems simultaneously with a roster that suddenly has far less margin for error than it did back in spring training. And that pressure explains why the reaction from fans was so immediate and so intense. Social media lit up within minutes of the transaction being posted. Some fans openly celebrated, thrilled that the front office had finally, in their eyes, listened to years of complaints about Volpe's inconsistency. Others expressed genuine sympathy, pointing out that Volpe had never publicly complained, never refused a request from the organization, and had, by nearly every account, been a good teammate and a hard worker through a stretch of performance that would have broken plenty of other young players. Both reactions were valid, and both were happening at the same time, which is exactly what made this such a viral moment in Yankee circles. It wasn't a simple story. It was a genuinely complicated one, with real stakes for a 25-year-old who had spent his entire adult life trying to become exactly what this organization drafted him to be. So where does this leave the Yankees heading into the stretch run? Lombard is now the shortstop of the present, not just the future, thrust into the lineup years ahead of when most evaluators expected, with the immediate pressure of trying to stabilize a position that's been unsettled for the better part of 2 seasons. Volpe is working out a completely new positional identity in the minors, trying to prove that his bat can play somewhere his body has never actually been tested before. Dominguez is doing the same kind of soul-searching in the outfield, trying to reclaim the ceiling that once made him one of the most hyped prospects in the entire sport. And at the big league level, the Yankees are still waiting on Judge, still waiting on Bellinger, still hoping the roster they've reshaped on the fly is enough to hold off Tampa Bay in a division race that stayed tight all summer. Every single one of those storylines is still unresolved, which is exactly why the shakeup isn't really the end of anything. It's the beginning of one of the most closely watched stretches of Yankees baseball in years, unfolding in real time, with a roster that looks nothing like it did on opening day. We'll be tracking every twist in this story as the Yankees push through the rest of the season, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because between the injuries, the trade deadline additions, and this roster shakeup, this team is not finished making headlines. This video is based on publicly available reporting, team statements, and ongoing coverage from outlets following the New York Yankees. Details reflect information available at the time of publishing and may evolve as the season continues. This content is intended for sports commentary and entertainment purposes.